Bonnie Parker, Eileen Wuornos, Patty Hearst, female criminals have captivated true crime fans for decades, with the motivations behind their actions and complex backstories often fascinating us. What is it about these women's stories that holds such a deep-seated interest for so many of us? Why is it that lawlessness is something that is more readily accepted from and almost expected from men, while women who commit heinous or illegal acts are often viewed as outliers and exceptions to the rule? Although history has given us many famous female criminals to study and wonder about, it stands to reason that there are just as many, if not many more of these law-breaking women who managed to slip through the cracks in history, their seriously mysterious stories slipping further from the public eye with every passing year. I'm John Lordan, and on today's episode, we're looking at one of those stories, the tale of a woman named Rory Jean Kesinger. She was a drug smuggler, gun runner, and a general outlaw. Somewhere down the line, she unfortunately became a missing person. Did Rory forge a new life for herself somewhere far from all the chaos that she had wrought? Did her associations with known criminals lead her to an untimely end? Or does the truth lie somewhere in between these two possible outcomes? Admittedly, not much is known about Rory Kesinger's childhood. Law enforcement never released these details to the media in any statements made about her. They never even released her parents' names, although internet sleuths have done their fair share of digging to figure out where this woman came from. From what can be gathered, Rory's father had been enlisted in the military in World War II, and in 1945, when he was only 19 years old, he was wounded in combat while attempting to pinpoint the location of enemy fire. When he returned to the United States, he was awarded a Silver Star Medal for his heroic effort. Sometime thereafter, it's assumed that he met Rory's mother, and in 1949, Rory Jean Kesinger was born in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. Records can be found on the website Ancestry.com that indicate she and her mother traveled from Fort Leavenworth to Okinawa, Japan in 1954, when Rory was only 5 years old. They returned to the United States the following year in April of 1955. It can be inferred from this that perhaps her father was stationed there at that time, and she and her mother had gone to stay with him for a while. After this, things get a little bit fuzzy. We know that Rory attended Cupertino High School in Cupertino, California around 1965, thanks to a yearbook photo of her that surfaced online. In the photo, her brown hair is pulled back and her blue eyes glimmer. She's staring directly at the camera, a small, slightly mischievous smirk on her face. Honestly, when compared to the photographs on the same page of her classmates, it almost seems as though she knows something the photographer does not. That smirk might be indicative of the future that she saw for herself, a future that was quickly approaching. Rory would have been around 15 years old in that photo, and it was around this time that she ran away from home and began her life of crime. Over the years that followed, Rory picked up warrants in several different states, most notably Texas, California, Kansas, and Alaska. She also had several aliases. Sometimes she spelled her last name, Kesinger, with 2 S's instead of 1. Other names she was known to use included Jennifer Marie Lynn, Linda Lynn Koch, and Penny Susan Johnson. She used these aliases to do everything from selling marijuana to robbing banks. Although as far as these crimes go, available information on them is sorely lacking. Something interesting that many have noted is a letter written by Rory's father to the editor of the Daily Illinois State Journal in 1969. Apparently at some point he had begun work as the security director for a department store. The first part of that letter reads as follows: "As the security director for Myers Brothers, I am deeply concerned by the increasing number of shoplifting cases that are being brought to my attention here in the Springfield area. This is by no means the only community in which theft has become a major problem, but it is this fact that has prompted me to enter a plea for help to all parents who are concerned with their children's welfare. If you question their sudden acquisition of new garments or other items of value when you realize that they were not purchased, perhaps the problem of your own child can be resolved within the confines of your home." Too often, our courtrooms must handle these cases and the cold, hard facts surrounding the crime that they have committed. Our single contact with your child does not permit us to deal with their individual personalities. It is a pretty ironic and maybe somewhat telling letter, considering what his own child was up to around that time. And it makes one wonder, how exactly did Rory's father choose to handle her individual personality at home? Considering that she attended high school in California and this letter was written to a newspaper in Illinois, was he even around for much of her childhood? Unfortunately, these are questions with answers that may not have withstood the test of time, and it's possible that we'll never really know much about Rory's upbringing. What we do know is that sometime in late 1972 to early 1973, Rory arrived in the Massachusetts area. Prior to this, according to Detective Warren Tobias, she was wanted all across the country at that time for her involvement in things like bank robberies, illegal gun deals, and drug dealing. The officers who happened upon her in Massachusetts were unaware of this and ultimately got much more than they bargained for from the slender 5'3" young woman. In January of 1973, Pembroke Police Lieutenant William Bolter was assisting the Stoughton Police with delivering a notice of traffic violation to a house in Pembroke. When the officers knocked on the door, a flurry of activity could be heard happening inside of the house, and several of its occupants attempted to run out of a back door. When Bolter ran after them, he noticed an attractive young woman wearing lingerie was amongst them. She tripped and fell, and when Lieutenant Bolter caught up to her, she frantically claimed that she had been raped. The lieutenant did the only thing he could think to do in that situation. He helped the woman back into the house so that he could take her statement. When they got inside of the house, as he was calling for assistance from his fellow officers, he felt her grab for his gun. After pushing her away, he followed her into another room where he found her with her own firearm. "I'm sorry, but I have to kill you," she said, pointing the gun at him and readying herself to shoot. Quickly, Bolter dove for her, pushing the gun away. He was able to handcuff the woman, later stating, "You just would not think that a nice-looking girl like that would kill you in a heartbeat." After the volatile young woman was identified as Rory Kesinger, she was taken to a nearby hospital for an evaluation. At the hospital, she was again underestimated for a moment and managed to steal another officer's weapon, screaming, "Die, effing pig," before being overpowered by an officer who kept that gun from firing. Without any hesitation on the part of law enforcement, Rory was quickly taken to Plymouth County Jail and kept there under 2 counts of assault with intent to murder. She stayed in jail until that May, just days before her trial was set to commence, and although there isn't much said about her time in jail, somehow I can't imagine that she made it easy for the guards. Sometime between the evening of May 26, 1973 and the following morning, Rory used a hacksaw blade that somebody had smuggled into the jail to cut the bars out of the laundry room window. She managed to squeeze herself through the open space that she had created and lowered herself down using several sheets that she had tied together. It sounds simple, maybe even stereotypical, but Rory's plan worked. Investigators theorized that there may have been somebody with a car waiting for her, but whether she left by herself or not, Rory Kesinger seemingly vanished into the night, never to be seen again. On July 26, 1974, over a year after Rory Kesinger escaped from jail, the decomposing body of a young woman was discovered at the Race Point Dunes in Provincetown, Massachusetts, by a young girl and her dog. There were 2 sets of footprints that led to the body, a size 10 shoe print found at the scene, and tire tracks found approximately 50 yards away. The woman had medium-length auburn hair that was pulled back into a ponytail and was around 5 feet 6 inches tall with a fairly athletic build. One of the most notable things about her was the extensive dental work, an estimated $5,000 to $10,000 worth, including crowns in a style that was known at the time as the New York style of dentistry. She lay face down on half of a beach blanket with a folded pair of blue jeans and a blue bandana beneath her head. She was nearly decapitated, something thought to have been a result of a violent strangulation, and her head had been crushed on one side. It was this injury that was determined to have caused her death. Several of her teeth had been forcibly removed. Both hands and one forearm were missing, and there were signs of a possible sexual assault. Investigators theorized that the woman may have been involved in some kind of criminal activity and that the removal of her hands, teeth, and forearm were her killer's way of obscuring the victim's identity. If so, it seemed to have worked. Investigators looked through thousands of missing persons cases during their initial investigation, only to come up with no viable matches for their victim. The woman, who would eventually come to be known as the Lady of the Dunes, was buried in 1974 after the case was closed due to a lack of leads. In 1981, a Canadian woman called the police to state that she had seen her father strangle a woman around 1972 in Massachusetts, but police were unable to find that woman to confirm the lead. Another lead from 1981 stated that a woman matching the victim's description was seen with the mobster Whitey Bulger. Although nothing ever became of this lead as far as the investigation was concerned, it is worth noting that Bulger was known to remove the teeth of his victims, and he also wore a size 10 shoe, the same size as the print found at the crime scene. In 1998, there seemed to be a glimmer of hope in the Lady of the Dunes case when it was brought to the attention of investigators that their victim could, in fact, be Rory Kesinger. Given that the physical profiles of Rory and the Lady of the Dunes were somewhat similar, and Rory had her daring prison escape the year prior to the Lady of the Dunes being found, the detectives handling the case went to work tracking down Rory's family to see if they could obtain a DNA sample from a relative. They found Rory's mother in Colorado. She was well into her 80s at this point and had no doubt wondered for many years what had ever become of her daughter. After obtaining a sample of Rory's mother's DNA, the Lady of the Dunes was exhumed in the year 2000, and an attempt was made to extract DNA from the unidentified woman's skull. This attempt was unsuccessful, and a second attempt was made to extract DNA from other bones. Thankfully, that attempt worked, and investigators now had what they hoped was the answer to the questions that they'd been asking for all these years. This was it, the moment police had been waiting for, and, as it turned out, the DNA was not a match. To be fair, the Lady of the Dunes case had numerous theories being tossed at it, and her being Rory Jean Kesinger seemed like it was just another shot in the dark. In 2004, Haddon Clark, a man who had been convicted of 2 murders and has claimed to have done many others in the 1970s and 1980s, sent a letter to a friend saying that he was responsible for killing the Lady of the Dunes. He stated, "I could have told the police what her name was, but after they beat the crap out of me, I wasn't going to tell them crap. This murder is still unsolved, and what the police are looking for is in my grandfather's garden." With that letter were 2 drawings, one of a handless, naked woman lying on her stomach, and a map of where the body was found. Detectives have stated that Clark is a paranoid schizophrenic and that his disorder is one that may lead a person to falsely confess to crimes that they did not actually commit. You might also remember the media blitz that happened around this case in August of 2015. Joe Hill, the son of renowned horror author Stephen King, was watching the 1975 film Jaws, which had scenes filmed about 100 miles south of Provincetown, when he saw a dark-haired woman wearing blue jeans and a blue bandana passing through a crowd as an extra in one of the scenes. Hill brought this to the attention of the police. A lead investigator worked on determining who that woman was. They even reached out to the casting director. They went through all kinds of old paperwork trying to find that woman, but they just couldn't find the extra's identity. Ultimately, it wouldn't matter, because thanks to just the theory that Rory Jean Kesinger was the Lady of the Dunes, an important step had been taken. They now had the Lady of the Dunes' DNA, and with that, genetic genealogy would be used to find her real identity. In October of 2022, it was announced by the FBI that the unidentified body was actually a woman named Ruth Marie Terry from the state of Tennessee. But why was her body found in Massachusetts? In late 2023, it was announced that investigators had an idea of what happened and even identified a suspect in her murder. Ruth had married a man named Guy Moldovan, and he returned home from their honeymoon trip driving her car. When Ruth's brother tried to work with Moldovan to find the missing woman, Moldovan told him that he and Ruth had a fight on their honeymoon, and he hadn't seen her since. The Cape and Islands District Attorney's Office has released a statement saying that they believe that Guy Moldovan is responsible for not only Ruth's death, but he's also the prime suspect in the death of another previous wife of his and her daughter, his stepdaughter, back in the 1960s in the Seattle area. He was also investigated for a double homicide that occurred in 1950. Unfortunately, he will not face justice for any of these crimes. Guy Moldovan died in 2002. However, 48 years later, the case of the Lady of the Dunes, the oldest unidentified victim to be found in the state of Massachusetts, finally had its answer, and in some part, thanks to Rory Kesinger. But where was she? What happened to Rory after her daring escape from prison? While it's certainly interesting to imagine that she adopted a new identity and simply started a new life, by all accounts, she was in pretty deep with criminal elements. Not only that, but she was known to use hard drugs regularly, which might explain her reckless behavior in January of 1973. In 1974, an associate of Rory's that she had been arrested with told Detective Tobias that Rory was, quote, pushing up daisies. And unfortunately, that possibility is very likely. Although her exploits seem like something out of an old Hollywood movie, it would stand to reason that they were merely the drug-fueled adventures of a young woman with poor impulse control and an affinity for danger. Although her family was never named in any articles about her and probably wanted to distance themselves from her reputation, at the end of the day, she was somebody that they knew and that they loved. I simply can't imagine what they have gone through after nearly 50 years without knowing what happened to her. Finding Rory Kesinger, or the truth about what happened to her, seems like it's been an incredibly difficult task since her big escape. It leaves one wondering about the possibilities. Did the life of crime eventually catch up to her? Did she leave all that behind and leave the country? Her disappearance may be a mystery, but the impact that she left on the Plymouth County Jail remains. According to the sheriff, quote, in the old prison, which is still up, you can still see the cut marks on the bars. Although it's clear that Rory was a bit of a loose cannon, it's just as clear that she spent the last part of her life on the run from something, whether it was her childhood circumstances or some form of her inner demons. Maybe, in the end, Rory Kesinger found the freedom that she had very clearly sought, even if only for a little while. We can only hope that someday the truth of what happened to her will come to light and her surviving family members can finally get the closure that they deserve. Do you have any insights, or even a case you'd like to suggest? Feel free to send it to me. You'll find a comment form and a case submission link at LordanArts.com. And please, join me again in 2 weeks with another case that I know you'll find seriously mysterious.